It's so great to be here today with you. Welcome to the Birds of the World Discovery Series webinar. We appreciate you joining us, and today we're excited to welcome members of the core Birds of the World team as we talk about our developing vision for Birds of the World and where we've come in the past few years. I am your host, Laura Kammermeyer, and I'm the Business and Communications Manager for Birds of the World. And joining me behind the scenes is Jessica Kane, who will be monitoring chat, dropping interesting links, and making sure that everything goes according to plan here. We have a full season of webinars planned for the season, so if you'd like to see what those are, Jessica will drop a link in the chat so you could see our schedule. That's online at our website. And we're interested in knowing a little bit about you. So if you wouldn't mind taking our little poll. Jess, are you there? Can you drop the poll in the chat?
Yep, I will launch the poll.
All right, good.
All right.
Great.
Participants should be able to vote now.
Excellent. This will help us just kind of learn a little bit more about you and what your experiences with Birds of the World is. All right, so a few logistical matters before we get started. The talk is scheduled for 50 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. The webinar will be recorded and sent out next week. They will also be available on our website and at the Cornell Lab YouTube channel and the Birds of the World playlist. So if you have any questions today for our team, please drop them in the Q&A section below in the menu items for Zoom below. You're welcome to use the chat for any general discussion with other audience members, but we can't guarantee a response from our team in the chat. Closed captioning is available, so if you use the CC below, you can get that translation in several languages. And if you have any feedback for us at the end of this webinar, please just use our contact form on our website, and we'd be happy to hear from you. So I'd like to set the stage for today's webinar. You may think of Birds of the World as an online ornithology reference, and it is. It's a scholarly research platform where you can read in-depth species profiles for every bird in the world. But behind the scenes, there's a much bigger picture at play. It's a tangible representation of a global community of nature organizations that are all working together on behalf of birds to document the natural history of every bird species in the world on a single platform. So that's the big idea behind Birds of the World. The works achieved by this community are great, and the works might not always be obvious to every person who reads Birds of the World. So they might not be seen always to everyone, but it never goes underappreciated by us. So these combined contributions are helping to achieve what I think is a monumental task, brick by brick by brick. And that task is a scholarly synthesis and display of all the available life history knowledge for an entire taxa on that single platform. So today we're going to hear more from the Birds of the World team about how people are working together to build this platform and look a little bit into the future too to see how we can extend Birds of the World into an even greater conservation tool. So at this point, I'd love our team to put your cameras on. All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you. So I'm really, really happy to introduce the team today. So let's go with some introductions. What I see, Brian's in the center, I believe, for me. Brian, raise your hand. So he is the digital publication lead for Birds of the World. He's worked at the lab for a very long time, wears a lot of hats. He's the former project leader for eBird during its young stages. He's traveled extensively and conducted field work on birds in North America, written many publications. And while a lot of questions keep Brian up at night, none is so pressing as how we can grow Birds of the World to be an even greater conservation tool. Welcome, Brian. So Brooke is our senior managing editor for Birds of the World. I call her the glue that keeps everything together because she is the person who organizes the content stream, the species accounts, and that large community of contributors that works together to develop the content. Thank you, Brooke. And Fernando. Fernando is our Latin American lead for Birds of the World, and he is a PhD ornithologist from Chile with a deep expertise in seabirds and storm petrels and water bird monitoring and conservation. He's involved with a Chilean NGO called ROC, where he has managed the Chilean eBird portal for many years and has led the first Chilean breeding bird atlas. We are so grateful to have Fernando working on our team. And because as Latin American lead, he is responsible for finding and supporting Latin American partners and the author community that contributes to Birds of the World. So thank you for joining us today, all of you. Team, do you have anything to add before we start? Okay, great. We're basically Brian will kick this off with a look at how Birds of the World has evolved. Brooke is going to discuss the global collaborations that make Birds of the World possible. Fernando will take a deeper look at how content partnerships in Latin America are bringing Birds of the World to an ever-widening community of birders. And Brian will then lay out our developing vision for Birds of the World. All righty, great. So Brian, I think it's your turn now.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I do, yes.
Great. Hello, everybody. Laura, can you switch to the next slide, please? Yeah, so it's great to be here today to talk about Birds of the World. We started this project in 2019, when we pulled together several existing platforms for life history information on birds. One of them was Birds of North America Online. Another was the Handbook of Birds of the World, and Neotropical Birds, and then Bird Families of the World. We sort of spent the year 2019 rolling together those four resources into what you see today as the Birds of the World platform. We thought initially, this thing, the idea was synthesizing all the known information in one platform would be better than having it scattered around in different places. So we worked hard on that, and I think it was pretty amazing to be able to pull that off and launch Birds of the World. We launched it on March 4th of 2020. And what we realized pretty quickly was that even though that was an accomplishment, we were thinking too small. We really didn't realize the global significance of the platform that we built, especially as it relates to research and conservation use. And we immediately started thinking differently about Birds of the World and really what it could become. We shifted, initially from a more sort of business-oriented mindset to one that was quickly focused on maximizing for reach and accessibility, and also scale and impact. So one of the sort of key things in our evolution, I'd say, over the last 4 years is realizing that Birds of the World, if anything, is a global collaboration of ornithological expertise. There's no other way to do this, and we can't do it alone from the Cornell lab. So we really had to re-envision how we would work this project. And Brooke is really going to take a deep dive into that global collaborative effort, specifically around the creation of content and how we pull resources into Birds of the World. And then I'd say another big shift for us in the last 4 years has been thinking, how do we create impact? How do we maximize impact with this resource? And there are a lot of things tied up in maximizing impact, tied to it, and really drivers of impact that we have to sort of figure out. Fernando Medrano is going to take a dive into that in his section of this webinar, and he's been really amazing at helping us figure out how to do this across Central and South America in particular. And importantly, just I'll say at the outset, the BOW community, the readers, the authors, now our partners, all the contributors around the world, has really helped us shape this new vision that you'll hear about later. And they've helped us steer these developments in the last 4 years in very meaningful ways. So thank you all for caring about Birds of the World, putting your time into it, and believing in this project. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Brooke to talk more about the idea of global collaboration and sort of how we're thinking about that now.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks to everybody who's here today. It is great to see this awesome audience. So, as Brian described, when Birds of the World debuted, we combined the detailed, regionally focused species accounts of birds of North America and neotropical birds with the encyclopedic coverage of the Handbook of Birds of the World. But our intention for this series is really for it to be a living resource that continues to deepen and evolve. Our aim now is to iteratively update Birds of the World to ensure that we present a current and comprehensive review of each species' natural history, systematics, conservation, management, and more. However, with more than 11,000 species and a constant stream of new avian insights coming from all over the globe, this effort is never done, and nor do we want it to be. This challenge, how to make Birds of the World an authoritative, essential, and scholarly resource that is engaging, useful, and accessible to users from all different perspectives and backgrounds, is one that we're endlessly passionate about. And fortunately, we're supported by a talented community of contributors who share in the vision and potential of this resource. BOW contributors are an international mix of professionals, academics, students, NGOs, working groups, enthusiasts, conservationists, artists, statisticians. The list goes on, the common denominator being a shared interest in making Birds of the World a rich and impactful resource. In fact, many people in this audience will be or already are involved in Birds of the World in one way or another, including dedicated authors who've made tremendous efforts to generate species accounts, photographers and recordists who've shared their media with the Macaulay Library, members of our wonderful volunteer copy editing team who are applying their considerable acumen to helping prepare drafts of species accounts, and students and staff who curate the wonderful galleries that bring accounts to life, or who help to update the maps that are used by both our project and by BirdLife International, and many others. You know, as the saying goes, it takes a village to make a resource like Birds of the World shine, and we're incredibly grateful that so many talented people are enthusiastic about the process and the art of updating this massive body of work. But let me tell you a bit more about that update process. So species accounts are updated in two different ways: partial revisions and full revisions. A partial revision, like these shown in purple boxes, are discrete and as focused as adding a single reference to an account, although more typically partial revisions involve updating one or a few topics, for example, revising just the conservation sections for a given species. A full revision, wherein a contributor or a team of contributors aim to do an exhaustive literature review and then update as many sections of an account as is possible, is typically a much more involved and longer undertaking. Full revisions can be relatively quick, depending upon the species, but more often they take on the order of weeks or months to complete, and sometimes even longer, as the goal, like Brian said, is really to present everything that's known about a species. I've highlighted the top row of full revisions in purple here. However, others are also indicated by their green tags. I should also note, I know this text is quite small, but the point here is just to give you an idea of the frequency and variety of full revisions that we've published recently. And I hope that you can take some time on your own to explore these. So these two modes of updates each have different benefits. Partial revisions are a really great way to contribute expertise about a specific topic. So something like molts and plumages, or bird vocalizations, or conservation, as I mentioned. They're also a straightforward way to ensure that a new or an overlooked reference is reflected in an account, as well as in BOW's master bibliography. Partial revisions also have the advantage of being a quick and additive way to keep species accounts better up to date. Full revisions are really the best option for contributors who have or want to have a lot of knowledge about a given species. As I mentioned, they involve an extensive literature review, and they also allow contributors the opportunity to showcase their writing skills for various audiences. Of course, full revisions must be well-researched, well-referenced, scientifically sound, and clearly written. However, they should also be engaging and interesting and help a reader connect with the essence of a species. We're very lucky to work with more than 2,000 contributors who continue to impress us with their ability to balance these different needs. And we're always looking for new people to share their expertise in both partial and full revisions. But I should also note that if anyone is looking to develop their scientific writing skills, we're happy to connect you with editors or a mentor who will help you develop your craft. In addition, full revisions are a great way to be an author on a scientific publication. So authorship is awarded by a contributor's relative contribution to each version of an account. But we had some questions from the audience about how BOW accounts are versioned, so I'd like to explain a little bit more about this convention. Every update, even a single new reference, may affect how an account is cited, and it's critically important that the content of BOW accounts, which does change, can still be cited faithfully and accurately at any point in time. For that reason, Birds of the World species accounts are versioned and given a distinct DOI or digital object identifier for each new version. Versions are then archived on the revision history page of each account, shown here, so that users have access to each step in an account's evolution. Full revisions, that is again a comprehensive revision that reasonably incorporates everything that can be incorporated from the literature, are what we would call a major revision, so a change from something like version 1.0 to 2.0. Whereas a less comprehensive update, something that doesn't incorporate all the available literature, would be a change from something like version 1.0 to 1.1. So as you likely know from our past webinars and yearly taxonomic update cycle, in addition to the changes that are incurred when an account is updated by a contributor, there are a wide variety of other changes that could affect how an account is cited. So what we think of as a species may change over time, or the context of that species may change within a larger phylogenetic framework. Likewise, we know that it can be confusing sometimes that all BOW species accounts start at version 1.0 with a citation date of 2020, which is when the project debuted, despite the fact that the content of a given account may have been last revised well before then. This is nonetheless an important convention because each of BOW's source projects are fundamentally different and distinctly citable entities, and by giving each version of a BOW account a new citation in DOI, we can ensure that the BOW series can be cited correctly over time. So to help clarify any confusion about the dates associated with each version, accounts that have not been revised will have a disclaimer shown here with the yellow arrow on the introduction page to let you know when the text itself was last updated. I should also note that this particular date last updated is about to change as a new revision is on the way. So as we know, writing or revising a species account is no trivial matter. And to help BOW achieve the resonance and the impact that we would like it to have, especially in an applied context, we must find a coherent way to facilitate big and small updates alike. Those updates must represent a diversity of perspectives, and they must happen on an agile and responsive timeframe. We also need to make it easier to update accounts collaboratively while still honoring the incredibly significant contributions of existing authors. To do this well, we need to better understand the priorities, values, and needs of those contributing at different levels. With the help of our partners and advisors, we put together a Google form, which Jess will put in the chat. And if you are a past BOW contributor or are considering getting involved in the future, we'd like to know more about your history with the project, your interests and expertise, your language preferences, your desired involvement going forward, and your feedback on how we can make the site even better. So we know that there's a lot of work to be done to make these species accounts as comprehensive, inclusive, and multifaceted as we aspire for them to be. And that is not something we can do by ourselves, as Brian said. The bedrock of Birds of the World has become our amazing alliance of partners who are helping to make BOW more rich, more detailed, more relevant, and more authentically collaborative than ever before. To talk a little bit about these partners, I would like to introduce Dr. Fernando Medrano, our partnership lead for Latin America. Hi, Fernando.
Hi. So can you see me? Okay. Can you go to the next slide, please, Brooke? Thanks, Brooke and Laura, for your introduction. For me, it has been an honor to be part of this amazing team. As Brooke, Brian, and Laura already explained, I'm in charge of leading the creation of this extensive network of partnerships in Latin America in the last year. So today I will speak a little bit about how these alliances work and how we are changing birds of the world together. So currently in Latin America, we have an alliance with 18 partners who are the birds of the world local ambassadors in their territories. Only to mention some organizations we have relationships with. For example, we can include CIPAMEX, Conservación de Islas, ICESE, the UNAM, SAD Brasil, Aves Argentinas, etc. These partners lead the update of the contents of Birds of the World, of the birds on their territories, and they also spread the word about Birds of the World to maximize the usage in their territories. And for doing so, also is important to say that in the case where we create partnerships, especially in the countries of the Global South, we provide free access to the whole country. Next, please. But of course, we aim to expand the network of partnerships beyond the Americas because Birds of the World is a global project. And in this regard, we have already created networks with several other organizations. For example, I'm remarking here Bird Count India and the project Robert Tate, who have brought their local expertise on species from India and other countries from the southern countries of Africa, and who have updated several dozens of amazing accounts. Next, please. And our relationships with the Malaysian Bird Report, the Endemic Species Research Institute, and the Oriental Club have also brought new sites for Birds of the World from Malaysia, Taiwan, and other regions in Asia. And this is an important message. We're looking forward to expand this network to other regions, particularly in Africa and in Asia. So if you are part of an organization that could be interested in being part of this alliance, please just let us know. Next, please. And thanks to the Birds of the World partners, we have improved our publication pace of both partial and full revisions, as Brooke mentioned before, bringing the local bird knowledge to Birds of the World. As an example of this, I'm representing here in red squares that in the recent weeks, more than half of the published accounts were developed by our content partners. Next, please. Birds of the World partners are currently an essential part of the conceptual development of Birds of the World as well. For instance, the rock from Chile tests Birds of the World how relevant can be the use of other tools of citizen science, of, for example, eBird, for describing the natural history of some species, of some little known species, which are actually most of the species of the neotropics. In this slide, I'm showing the example of the mountain caracara, where several non-predator interspecific interactions were described for the very first time, thanks to the revision of all the pictures that are included in the Macaulay library for this species. And of course, our partners are generally using eBird as well for the most classical use, which is describing the distribution of the species. In this recently updated account, the white-cheeked cotinga, our Peruvian partner Corvidi just expanded the distribution and described the northernmost and southernmost distribution, thanks to reviewing the distribution in eBird. Also, in Birds of the World, we're quite conscious that the information of several regional journals especially those that are in other languages than English, um, are not included sometimes in Birds of the World in the species accounts. So for addressing this issue, another idea that was brought from ROC in Chile was to make a massive update on what has been published in the ornithological journals. So we're bringing all what is in these journals to Birds of the World. And we are doing light but fast revisions, and we're publishing several accounts per week for doing this. In this case, I'm showing you what Rock did with the snowy crown tern. However, we're going to do this with several other partners potentially. For example, we're in conversations with people of Argentina and eventually with some people from Mexico. Next, please. Yeah. However, and also thanks to many conversations with the Birds of the World partners, we have learned how much English is a barrier for the use of Birds of the World, especially for the use in conservation by stakeholders, but also for education, for example. So for this reason, we're giving our first steps on making Birds of the World a multilingual platform. As you can see in this slide, our first step is going to be the release in the next month. It's not so clear the exact date, but it's going to be between the end of September or the beginning of October of the whole platform in Spanish. So we're going to have a translation of the whole text, but also you will be able to choose the regional name that you have in Birds of the World. For example, can you move one more, bro, please? You will be able to choose between different Spanish names, common names, according to those that have been agreed by the eBird community of Birds of the World in these countries. For example, you will be able to choose between Argentinian Spanish, Chilean Spanish, Mexican Spanish, etc. Next, please. But this is only the first step. We want to transform Birds of the World in a multilingual platform with many languages. However, before translating to other languages, we're aiming to have partnerships in different countries that are speaking the other languages so that they can support the process of the translation, since it requires like certain supervision. We have done this with an important supervision, and thanks to all the volunteers who gave feedback to the previous version of the translation. And that's all with me. So I turn it over again to Brian. But I will be very happy of hearing your feedback, questions in the Q&A section. So thank you so much.
Sorry, folks. A little bit of a technical difficulty there. Let me try this one more time. Look good? All right.
Yeah. Looks good, Brian.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Thanks, Fernando. That's an exciting announcement about the Birds of the World coming to Spanish-speaking populations. I can't say how transformative that is for us at Birds of the World. And thanks, Fernando, and everybody involved in helping that process along over the last many months. We're really looking forward to seeing how far we can push into more and more languages for Birds of the World. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's next for Birds of the World. And I'm going to start by just jumping to our vision statement. So about a year ago, we got together and put together a 5-year vision for Birds of the World. We really wanted to focus on the idea of making it more dynamic, more collaborative, and more geared toward making an impact for research and conservation. And there's a lot of stuff rolled up in that vision that I'm going to talk about. And you've heard a lot today already about partnerships. And we launched Birds of the World with a few partners. And I do want to say um, groups such as Bird Count India and ROC in Chile were very early adopters of Birds of the World and were really key in helping us figure out how Birds of the World could work in this partnership landscape. And, I really want to thank those organizations and many others now for joining in Birds of the World and helping us figure this stuff out. I think, if anything, in the future, we really want to make sure that we are developing a robust and collaborative network of partners that are deeply involved in the entire Birds of the World enterprise, if you will. These partners accelerate our publishing cycle, and as Fernando pointed out, they're really key at getting the information from Birds of the World into the hands of people who need it on the ground in those regions. So we're really excited about pushing partnership opportunities forward with Birds of the World. You've seen this slide a few times, and it's really important. It's an important one for us, and it's been really transformational for us to think about how we change our business model. When Birds of the World was launched, we went out the door with a business model that was just like Birds of North America and Handbook of Birds of the World, which is we were selling subscriptions to it to individuals and institutions. We very quickly realized that that business model presents lots of barriers, not only to people accessing the information, but people taking part in the whole project in general. So we realized very quickly that we're going to have to change and adapt this business model over time, which led to this idea of building partnerships where we could open up Birds of the World regionally to all constituents. So right now, I think we have about 130 countries open, and we really want to push this model as far as we can. It's important to note that the subscription revenue that we do generate goes fully back into supporting the cost of running Birds of the World itself. So it's a real tricky situation for us to think about completely jettisoning the idea of having subscriptions, but we are trying to figure that out. So I'd say in the next 5 years, we really do want to figure out how do we make Birds of the World freely accessible everywhere in the world? How do we make it available in as many languages as we can? And then, I think one thing that we do have up our sleeve is this idea of building an avian life history journal inside Birds of the World, similar to what, for those of you familiar with ornithological notes, was part of the Handbook of Birds of the World. The idea of that is to sort of democratize one's ability to publish life history information in that sort of peer-reviewed space. So we often run into the case where Birds of the World is a synthesis of the peer-reviewed literature, but there is a significant barrier to the actual publication of life history data, notes, things like that in the current ornithological literature. So we're thinking about how do we bring a more open and accessible life history journal component inside Birds of the World as well. So this one is important to talk about, although this slide I know is a little bit boring. It's really critical for us to make sure that our house is in order with regard to the technical backbone of birds of the world. It's not very exciting to talk about database architecture and infrastructure, scalability, efficiencies, all those things, but we have to have a laser focus on that because we are now the stewards of this global set of ornithological information, and we think of birds of the world as a platform for um, growing that over time. So we have to think about how are we going to sustain this, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a technical one. And how do the data resources that we generate for birds of the world fit into the broader landscape of data resources coming from the Lab of Ornithology and elsewhere? So you can see in this little cartoon that birds of the world really represents a new data gear in the big sets of information that are being gathered and curated at the lab. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So as I said in the intro, one of our big sort of mindset shifts, or maybe not a mindset shift, but a realization that we had very early on in the last 4 years was we really need to start steering birds of the world toward amplifying its impact for research and bird conservation. So actionable science and data are sort of the currency of the Lab of Ornithology. This image that you're seeing here is an abundance map that's generated from eBird data models for an American kestrel, which was the small falcon that you saw in the previous slide. Now, in this abundance map, you're seeing a whole lot of information in a whole lot of detail, unlike anything we've ever seen before for this species. And that's an amazing set of information that's coming out now annually from eBird's status and trends, science outputs that we consume and display and make available through Birds of the World. But as Laura said, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night. And one of the things that really keeps me up at night is when you start to look at the trends data that are being generated by eBird. Now, these trends models are showing basically increases and decreases in bird populations only over the last 10 years. So you can see for American kestrel, it's doing pretty poorly. All of these red dots represent declines in species abundance at an incredible spatial and temporal scale. So one of the things that we're thinking about with Birds of the World is, how do we generate actionable data that helps us understand these kinds of outputs? For American kestrel, you can see that basically the entire range is red. But for many birds, it looks more like this. This is the trend model for long-billed curlew, which is the biggest curlew in the world, very similar to some of the bigger species in Eurasia. But this thing, this is the breeding season trend for long-billed curlew, and this is much more typical where you see a mixed pattern. So in this case, the breeding populations in the Great Basin, particularly in Utah, are doing really poorly over the last 10 years. But those in the northern Great Plains are even increasing or staying steady, where you see the white circles. But one of the things that keeps me up at night is that it's really hard to get at why these trends are happening. And, eBird is going to be great, continue to get better and better and more refined in its ability to tell us where and when these populations are increasing and decreasing, but it's really difficult to get at why they're changing in space and time. So one of the things we're thinking about is it's really critical to start thinking about collecting data on individual birds in much higher resolution than has ever been done before. And we think we can build these kinds of data resources into Birds of the World. So you can think about these things as species level traits, so life history attributes of the birds themselves. You can think about examples like, are they insectivores, granivores? What are their habitat requirements in breeding, migration, and winter? Some of the species level things that stay the same in space and time for the most part that we can pull into a database to start to understand the birds a little bit better. Then there's a second chunk of information that we think of as continuous trait data. And those are traits that vary in space and time and across individuals and populations. You can think of those as morphometric data, things like body condition, molt, things like that. So the third bit is vital rates and how successful birds are when they're trying to breed. What is their productivity, survival, recruitment, all of these kinds of things. All of these kinds of data are scattered around in various different resources currently. And we think that there is an opportunity to begin to gather and curate these data at scale for every bird in the world so that we can start to make inferences about why birds might be declining here, increasing here, and then take more informed conservation actions. So the future we think of around this is this project called High Resolution Ornithology, which will be a component of Birds of the World that is really focused on, I don't want to say replacing, because what we do today with Birds of the World as a text-based ornithological synthesis is really critical. But we want to add value to Birds of the World by creating these sort of machine-readable data sets on life attributes of birds that can really be used in this modeling framework that's becoming ever important for understanding what's happening with birds and taking conservation actions on the ground. So we really need to do this at scale. We have a lot of work to do in this in this space, and we're getting started. We've got a few people in the mix now coming to join our team to help with this stuff and spin up this new effort around what we think about as life history data resources. So I'd say, if we want to change, if we want to understand these trends and then change them, we have a lot of work to do. We need to do it fast because bird populations are in severe decline, as everyone knows, not just in North America, but around the world. And we're really focused on trying to figure out how we make Birds of the World most effective in this space of saving birds and biodiversity. We, as everyone's pointed out, we know we can't do this alone. We're extremely grateful to all of our partners, authors, editors, students, copy editors, everyone that contributes data to eBird, Macaulay Library. Without those people doing that, we would not be able to generate these models and understand what we do already about bird populations. And then lastly, I really want to take a minute to thank the generous donors that have stepped up and helped support Birds of the World so that we can be experimental with our approach to partnerships and open access and shifting business models and all of these kinds of things that will be evolving over time. Our Cornell Lab donor base has been amazing. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll shift over to the discussion question and answer period. And Laura, will you take it from here?
Yeah, just everybody, if you could just get rid of the screen and then everybody could show their faces on screen, we'll go from there. Great. So what I love the fact that we've reached this point and the transformative notion that Birds of the World we're merely stewards of this content. We provide a platform that it allows us to archive and display it in some real novel ways. But this information belongs to everybody, and it's this group effort that takes so many. So we've really kind of moved beyond that and reached that, and I'm proud to work with this project. And So we've got a lot of questions out here. The feedback on the poll, I just quickly, I noticed that almost everybody took the poll, so thank you. We have a lot of people who use it regularly. A lot of people, there's kind of an even split between the people who are academic, recreational, and just use it for a general way to learn more about birds. And thank you to all the contributors who are sitting in the audience today. There's at least 70 of you. And there are at least 40 of you who might be interested in joining us. So if you could look for Brooke's Google form in the chat or reach out to us via contact form, we'll just start to, have a discussion and see what we can do together. So thank you all for that. Okay, we have some questions to get through today. All righty. So I had a question for the team. I wonder, so now when we release these Spanish translations, which should be sometime in October, we realize that they won't be perfect, right? But we want to also just be able, we think it's also another transformative moment. How can our partners and people who are reading, Spanish-speaking users of Birds of the World, help us kind of make sure that information reaches new audiences? Do you have any ideas for that?
Do you mean, sorry, Laura, I just want to be clear on the question. Do you mean how can they help us improve the quality of the translations, or how do we get the word out
Get the
that
word out.
Birds of the World's available in Spanish?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of two questions in one, but really, how can our Spanish speaking audience help us get the word out?
I'll let Fernando handle that one.
Yeah, well, generally, we trust that task to our partners, usually, especially to our outreach partners. Yeah, but we're gonna spread the word as much as we can as well, because it's gonna be very important that especially local governments, that the educational organizations know about this new functionality and know that the English will not longer be a barrier in those territories. So yeah, that's more or less our strategy right now. And about the other question, we're gonna establish a mechanism of getting feedback, and we're not gonna get feedback on a case by case basis, but more we're gonna try to find like systematic errors that we identify that we can solve automatically, like through teaching to the machine what the machine should be translating. And that will improve several accounts. But always there are going to be small mistakes.
Right. So there's a person who actually reached out to us and said she might be interested in contributing as authors, but as a translator, and would love to help the Spanish versions. Is there something individuals can do when they see a mistake?
That will be possible, but in a second stage, because yeah,
great,
for the most permanent stage at least.
All right.
Yeah, I would just build on what Fernando's saying by it might be helpful to describe a little bit the process.
Oops.
Further Cornell Lab of Ornithology products or projects that have translations like Merlin or eBird, the amount of text that's been translated is very small, and we've been able to do that effectively by working with partners to just create translations one by hand. For Birds of the World, that approach isn't really tenable because there are millions and millions of words in Birds of the World species accounts. And, it's just a tremendous amount of information to think about translating by hand. So we really had to think about how to leverage the developing AI landscape, specifically machine translation tools. So we explored several different machine translation options and landed on a service called DeepL, which had a little bit more flexibility and a flexibility for us to create domain-specific glossaries for every language and a lot more fine-tuning than some of the other options. So we're not just sending information to a machine translation service and hoping it does great. We have spent a lot of time building this into our publication infrastructure so that the machine translation is translating the right components of the site, ignoring things like species names and such that shouldn't be translated. It's honoring our glossary that Fernando and the partners have worked hard to build. And we'll need to do that for every single language that we decide to add to Birds of the World. Probably Portuguese and French will be next up. And I will say that this is a long-term investment for us, and we realize that machine translations will get better over time, and hopefully our process will get more refined. But there's no question that it's not going to be perfect probably now or ever, but it does bring down the barrier to accessing this core Birds of the World information to a whole new subset of readers. So we're really excited about it.
Absolutely. We had another question from somebody. Graduate students in Latin America are often unable to publish their theses and dissertations. Is it possible for that unpublished data about birds to be incorporated into species accounts? Brooke, do you want to take that?
Yeah, Fernando, you might have something to say about it too, but to my mind, we absolutely welcome that. That would be a wonderful addition and a way to give visibility to the work that the students are doing while enriching our resource with data that somebody really carefully collected and presented. It's a win-win.
Mm-hmm. So, can you just take a moment, Brooke, to describe to our audience, which is very international, how we go about prioritizing which species are updated and what effect that has on regional information, right? Where are there gaps? Where do we need more information at a faster pace?
Oh, man. Well, to answer the last part of that question first, there is a real urgency to get information that's relevant to conservation into the BOW series. We all are invested in the idea that this series can be useful and applicable on the ground. And so that's probably one of our highest areas of need and that we prioritize the most. In terms of how we update accounts, a lot of it has to do with the contributors that we're working with at any given moment. We work with a large slate of contributors from all over the world, and part of that is opportunistic. People will come to us and ask if they can update an account, and we go through an editorial process where they draft an account. Editors will give them feedback, and then at the end of that, we publish this wonderful species account. Regionally, there does tend to be a greater focus for areas in which we have partners. And so I saw in the questions there were some that referred to South Africa, and we have a wonderful partnership with the Roberts 8 Birds of Southern Africa project, and they are going through and systematically updating every species account within their region. They have a wonderful team of editors and authors, and they're putting out some really high quality materials, so I encourage you to check those out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just for people watching who don't know really what goes on behind the scenes, we've got short form accounts and long form accounts. The short form accounts tend to have come from HBW Alive, and we're in the process of taking all of those and filling them out with more information, more life history information. So when we find contributors or when they approach us, that's when we're able to then put more effort into that. And we've got a link on our website, maybe Jessica can put that up, to our recently updated accounts. So if you are either in a free country or a subscriber already, you can see what has been updated in the last, well, there's about 200, the last 200. I wish it went forever because there's so many more that we've updated than you can see there. All right, let's see. Somebody wants to know a little bit about the integration between eBird and Macaulay. So if we could give a real short answer to that, Brian, you could describe just the function of that.
Sure. There are several places where eBird data are integrated into Birds of the World, and Macaulay Library media underpin every single species account in Birds of the World. So all the photos and galleries and things like that that you see come from user contributed media that have been uploaded to Macaulay largely through eBird checklists. Now, if you're an eBird user, in Birds of the World today, if you go to any species, you can see the status of your relationship with the bird, whether you've seen it, photographed it, made a sound recording of it. There's a little panel in Birds of the World on every species page that shows your media and things like that, totals, and you can jump over easily into the Macaulay Library eBird universe. So the site's sort of designed to let you crosswalk between the three pretty easily. But I would say, yeah, if you're an eBirder and you're invested in that system, a lot of the really cool stuff in Birds of the World is kind of linked to your eBird data. So, and it will be increasingly so, I think, as we move forward.
Right. So your eBird contributions essentially start to inform the maps, and every single time an account is updated, our maps team goes into the eBird data, looks at the maps, adjusts. There's actually quite an extensive way that those maps are updated with not only eBird data but anything that's available, and then we produce maps based on the best intelligence at the time before it goes out. And then again, the Macaulay Library is a massive wildlife media library, and if you are uploading any media, that goes into the library, and our authors will then look at the media library in order to bring in whatever is the most representative photos or videos for that species, males and females, behavior, nesting habits, all of that. So thank you to everyone. You don't have to be an expert at everything to have some contribution to Birds of the World. There's thousands of people all over the world that have done something that has made Birds of the World be what it is today.
Yeah, I would just to add to that really quickly, Laura, there is so much media coming into Macaulay Library that describes completely novel things about the life history of birds, nests, eggs, the interspecific interactions, example that Fernando showed. The Macaulay Library is an unbelievably rich archive now for discovering that stuff, and we do try to uncover as much of that as we can and pull it into Birds of the World.
Right. And so some birders feel that having a perfect profile shot of a bird with perfect light is all that Macaulay Library would want, but it's a scientific resource. So we're looking for those things of habitat shots. Soon Macaulay will be able to accept those, and the behaviors and the breeding. And so, if it isn't a perfect shot, but it's demonstrating something unique about the bird, again, what you said, interspecific interactions, please consider uploading that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the most colorful of the species, the female as well. Okay, so here's one. Can you please discuss how you enter information from larger resources into Birds of the World? Do publishers of some famous large reference books object to your acquiring their information? I would say no, we work together on that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the situation, right? We are we're trying to pull information from the original sources. So for big syntheses of literature that exist already, we all of that stuff was sort of already incorporated into Handbook of Birds of the World and things like that. So we pulled together a bunch of those kinds of resources to begin with, and now we're trying to pull only from the original literature, I'd say. And there are discussions happening around some of the other existing big life history series. Handbook of Australia and New Zealand Birds, for example, is one that we're actively talking with BirdLife Australia about how we can partner with them to potentially bring those resources to life through Birds of the World. So I would say every one of those is a unique discussion, those big resources, and we really try to make sure that we're not just taking information from some compendium and republishing it in Birds of the World. I don't think we do that.
Brooke, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a good summation. We definitely encourage our authors to rely on the primary literature.
Okay. There's a few very specific questions. Hello, Praveen. Can you provide a means to download the citation of an account so that it can easily be imported into Zotero, just like BibTeX? That's a pretty technical question, but has that been a thought of ours ever?
I'm sorry, could you read that again? Was he talking about, Praveen? Hello. Are you talking about the citation for the account itself or the body of citations that support the account, or both?
I'm thinking it's the references.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we have actually discussed a way to download references in a format that could be then uploaded into some other software package. But that's a really good idea, and something we should consider. We've very consciously not tried to recreate or build our own EndNote type database, but we do have a huge synthetic master bibliography for Birds of the World. So there could be a way to kind of let people search that, download it. It is a resource unto itself at this point that we could think about differently. But yeah, that's a good point.
How will Birds of the World adapt to the potential changes provided by the AOS name change? And I think that's pretty easily answered with the taxonomy updates. Who would like to tackle that?
Could you read that question again, Laura? Sorry.
Yeah. So how will Birds of the World adapt, our name database, adapt to potential changes provided by the AOS name change in the near future?
Yeah. So we follow the Clements eBird taxonomy in Birds of the World, which does follow the AOS in terms of its taxonomy and common names. So whatever decisions AOS makes around common names, you will see reflected in Birds of the World. I will say that we know this is a contentious issue for some folks, name changes specifically. eBird has a really neat way of handling common names where I think right now we're supporting 80 or more sets of common names globally. So there is a lot of flexibility around how one uses common names in the eBird Birds of the World Merlin landscape, and it's pretty customizable. So I think moving forward, there's a there will probably be different sets of common names that you could choose to use. And the important thing is that behind the scenes, we have one taxonomic concept that we're talking about, so that it doesn't matter what the common name is. It's the taxon itself is what's critical, so that somebody in Europe knows that you're talking about the same taxon as, someone in Africa or Asia. So we have to be really careful about that. But it's kind of a long-winded way of saying we will be making common name changes as AOS officially does, but there's a high degree of customization available in our system for common names.
Okay. This is a real good some input, more like some feedback about accessibility. What do we have plans at this point, or on the horizon of accessibility for birds of the world? What plans do we have to kind of continue our thoughts on developing more accessible elements in terms of visual or hearing elements for the resource? We do have a team, right? Our internet team has kind of like an internal group that makes sure that we meet the basic requirements that public online publications have. And so without those requirements, we can't be doing business in our academic universities. So we had to do some of the basic stuff, and we had to develop a work plan that was approved by a third party to make those conditions, I guess, verified. And I think there's a lot more that we can do, and I think it's an area of learning that we need to learn more about. So the person who asked that question, if you have any other suggestions for us about tools that you use in similar types of online publications, I would say reach out to us, because I'd really love to learn more.
Yeah, I would just add to what you said there, Laura, by just saying that Cornell writ large is really dedicated to making sure that its web content is as accessible as possible. And we just went through a process, as Laura described with Birds of the World, to improve the web accessibility up to modern standards for Birds of the World. Every Cornell property, not lab property, but Cornell University property, has to go through these kinds of tests and improvements. And we will continue to go through those cycles as new technology becomes available. We do get a ranking on that periodically that we have to give to other universities and institutional subscribers and things like that, who also have their own web accessibility standards that need to be met. So we are aware that this is an issue, and Cornell's dedicated to doing what it can do, and we certainly are too. So we'll constantly be iterating to make sure that Birds of the World gets better and better in this regard. But as Laura said, if you do have specific things that Birds of the World's falling short on right now, let us know.
Absolutely. And Richard Baker, I saw your question. Yes, university libraries can subscribe to Birds of the World. So we do have we've got about 600 institutional subscribers across the world, and where people in about 130 different countries use the resource that we're aware of. So it gets quite a bit of it's quite spread out. Okay, I love this comment from somebody anonymous. I deeply appreciate what you're doing to enhance it as an important global resource at the upper levels of science. I hope you won't lose sight of the lowest level users. I learn from Birds of the World, and I use it as a resource when writing for small local groups and reviews of books for kids. Thanks for all you're doing. So thank you so much for that. It's really great to be reminded that our audience is very broad across the whole spectrum. Even our little poll here shows that it is quite even between scientists, birders, and other educators and learners.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And as we enter this sort of Wild West era of generative AI, and you can go onto some web browser and ask it anything, and it will give you an answer. It may
Mhm.
not be right, but it'll give you an answer. You know, Birds of the World's been thinking a lot about how we operate in that landscape, how we distinguish ourselves as an authoritative, trusted resource for information. And we definitely want to make sure that we keep the academic focus of Birds of the World very high and the quality very high. We will not be using generative AI to generate content for Birds of the World. I'm going to say that straight out. We might use those tools to help us discover content that exists, but never to generate it. Um, and I think, keeping in mind that as long as the information is factual and well written, hopefully the use case that you just mentioned, you can easily understand what we're talking about, what's being presented, and you can still use it as a resource for the same kinds of things you're doing right now. I don't see any of that changing moving forward.
Yeah, and I would just say that sometimes we have to make such hard decisions on our team about what we can create. We've got no shortage of ideas. And because we all care so deeply about birds, we've placed a great focus on the things that will support the academic research and conservation people. And it by no means does it mean that the general birding audience isn't important. It's just that we have to make some really hard decisions. So I guess I hope that helps you understand where we come from on that. But if you have any ideas, we always want to hear them. So we try to fit something in every year that will be enjoyable for our community.
Well, just to say one more thing on this, there is some exciting work happening at the lab now between the group that runs the website All About Birds and Birds of the World. All About Birds is, you can think of all Birds of the World as sort of deep life history information, and you can think about All About Birds as basic life history information, and it's many fewer articles in much less depth without the scientific references and all that built into the text. So that All About Birds resource is really geared toward um, birders and anybody else who has questions around the life histories of birds. And currently, All About Birds is focused in North America, but there are a lot of discussions around should we create that layer of basic information for every bird in the world? If we're doing the deep stuff, we can pretty easily do the basic stuff too. When I say easily, nothing's easy. I shouldn't have said that. It's hard to, but should we commit to doing that? And I think there's a big movement at the lab right now that in thinking, yes, we should. So for those of you who are interested in that more basic summary set of life history information, that could be coming down the line here for
Mhm.
every bird in the world.
Yeah. Um, Here's a question about partners. Birds of the World is not very well known in Scandinavia, as far as this person knows, mostly due to the use of national bird portals and limited use of eBird Cornell resources. Do you have any plans to include and cooperate with BirdLife partners in Scandinavia and Northern Europe to disseminate this excellent tool?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We, I don't know where to start the answer to this one, so I'll just back up about 15 years to when eBird sort of launched globally. I was working at eBird at the time, and there in many places around the world there was no eBird like system, but in Europe, especially Western Europe and Scandinavia in particular, there were eBird like systems, and there still are eBird like systems that exist, many of them very, very good. and many well used and well loved by local communities. So it's been, you know, a challenge to try to figure out how best to work in an eBird landscape with those groups. And I think the approach so far has been, as long as the data are being collected in a meaningful way in through these other tools, there's been no sort of push to try to consolidate things in eBird or anything like that. The the focus of eBird's global footprint has been building it in places where these other tools don't exist. And those discussions with other eBird-like systems have happened and are happening kind of continuously, but I don't see any strong movement toward consolidation into a single database for these kinds of systems, at least not at the moment. And like I said, as long as the data are being collected and made accessible for research and conservation, that's the thing. And from a birds of the world standpoint, I think there's less like it out there, but there are a few things like it out there. I don't think there's anything with as much breadth, so covering all the species of the world. And there's very few examples that are as deep, right? But I would say we are highly interested in discussions with those platforms if they exist. And like I mentioned, Handbook of Australia, Antarctica, and New Zealand birds is one of these things that we're in active discussions about. Birds of the Western Palearctic has been discussed before. I don't know if that'll come back to the table, but I would say we at Birds of the World and at the lab more generally are very open to any discussions about collaborations, and welcome those discussions at any time. So if you have ideas about who we should talk with, or ideas for ways we could pull resources together, please bring them to me and I'll get them to the right people if I'm not that person.
And all that said, we do have strong relationships with many BirdLife offices in the main office out of Cambridge. But if we haven't met your team from Scandinavia yet, please get us in touch somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should have said that at the outset. BirdLife has been a great partner for the lab for many, many years, and many of our global partners are BirdLife partners, regional BirdLife partners. So there's no weirdness between BirdLife and the lab. It's great. We just want to do more of that kind of collaboration. So
right.
let's do it.
Kind of related, Glenn from the UK says, well, gosh, I don't see any partnerships in the UK right now, but we do actually have the strong relationship with BirdLife in the UK, and we are working with several partners there. If there's any way that any contacts you have, Glenn, that we should be speaking with that we aren't already, we'd obviously be very happy about doing that. Praveen asked if Avonet was integrated or getting integrated. Avonet, maybe describe what that is for our audience.
Yeah, Avonet is a species level traits database that was really transformative. Was launched a few years ago as an academic paper where you can download a set of traits data at the species level that was pulled together by Joe Tobias's group out of the UK. We have been in discussions with Joe around Avonet as a backbone for the idea of the high resolution ornithology project. I would say those discussions are very preliminary right now. Joe's group continues to build stuff into Avonet, which is great. And I think there's a lot of potential there for great collaboration and synergy. So we have, like I said, We've got a postdoc coming to start, Nadi Garcia. She's from Argentina. She's coming to start with us in mid-October to really spearhead those discussions around species level traits information. So working with Joe Tobias and his group and others that do similar things will be part of that initial work for Natty.
Mm-hmm. Great. There's a really good question for Brooke. A lot of good questions here. We have just 10 minutes left. 223 people are still online, so thank you all for sticking with this interesting topic. Brooke, with the annual taxonomic update, will new species accounts be created for recently split species, and are you currently seeking authors for those new species?
Oh, that's a great question. And I believe that's from Zoya Buckmeyer, who's one of Bird Caribbean's editors. So thanks for the great question, Zoya. Just to back it up a minute, we do a yearly taxonomic update of the entire Birds of the World series, in addition to all the other Cornell Lab projects. And so that is currently gearing up right now. So we've got about 600 species accounts that will be affected in this year's update. And it is quite a sprint to the finish line, as you can imagine. And so we do have a lot of new accounts, and we would love to have authors working on those. There's a lot of opportunities there. And right now, we're preparing sort of a basic version of many accounts to provide sort of a taxonomically consistent foundation that authors can build off of. Our taxonomic update is temporally constrained, so we're kind of working up to the date of the public release in October. And so once that is done in October, authors can feel free to set their own timelines and make these really rich, wonderful species accounts.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love this question because they're wondering about the renaming. Great to have a short section on etymology of species names. Do we have that?
We have a couple different varieties of that. So we've got the Jobling Key to Scientific Names, which appears on the introduction page of species accounts. And that is a really, really rich and detailed look at the etymology of names and the history behind that. We also have the systematics history section on the systematics page, which gives you sort of a more contextual version of how species change over time, including their names and the concepts. And then we have the nomenclature section, which we use to sort of explain how those names came to be and other names that might not be represented in the species name list on the introduction page. So names in other languages that might have some sort of cultural value or significance.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked about what our relationship is with INAT. Do we share any records with INAT? Do we go to INAT as a resource? Oops, volume.
How far do I go back in time on this response?
No, make it very quick.
Let me just say that the Cornell Lab has a great relationship with iNaturalist. eBird is in sort of weekly discussions with iNaturalist. We don't have any specific iNaturalist tie with Birds of the World. So that's sort of the short version of that.
Our authors do go to it sometimes, right?
I'm sure, yeah. I mean, like you said, for range map updates, things like that, they would be consulting all sources, including iNaturalist. It would be great if you clicked on a bird in iNaturalist and they pulled in our stuff instead of Wikipedia, but we can talk to them about that.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So somebody asked, are you planning some way for the status of critically endangered species to be updated frequently? Well, we kind of already have that. So if you could explain, maybe Fernando, do you want to take a shot?
Well, I think that Brooke's better for this question, but yeah, we try to update that as soon as possible, and BirdLife updates the status of the birds once a year, and we try to update that as well as soon as we can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I would just say, in addition to what Fernando's saying, we have sort of an internal prioritization system, and we rank species of high conservation concern at the top. And so oftentimes our editorial team will go out and invite people who are working on those species to contribute, because those are really accounts where we want people who are experts for that species to be able to get that information in there.
Mhm. Thank you. Any plan to introduce non-native species tags into our regional explorer? So if you go to Birds of the World, you click species, you're going to see basically color plates for every single bird in the world, but you can narrow that down by region and by conservation status, this IUN conservation status. The question is, can you narrow it down so you're only getting native species and not others?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's been a lot of work done in the back end of the eBird database recently to enable this. So you can see the preliminary versions of that now on eBird. If you go to explore a region and you look at the species list, you can see that it's separated by introduced exotic stuff at the bottom. So that information is now available for us to consume. It's just a matter of whether we can figure out how to get it into our taxonomy explorer and the priority for doing that. And I think, you know, we do have some developments on deck for the taxonomy explorer, including a phylogenetic view of the information, which would be great. So maybe we could roll that in as well. So yeah, good idea, and thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So, Brooke, one person, Sam, hello, we is asking about the standardization of accounts. We have so many authors who use somewhat different terminology. You know, some of our accounts are more narrative, and some of them might be a little more brief in the information they present. So, is there any way that we've thought about helping improve that standard?
Yeah, it's really a balancing act. As anyone who's written for the series knows, we have a really large editorial guidelines document to help people standardize that approach. But there are some content areas where we don't want it to be standardized. So, you know, I think what we're sort of coalescing around is the idea that there are some sections where authors can take more liberties, both in their writing and their approach, and some sections where we really want sort of a discrete data point or, you know, a really highly topical presentation. And we continue to improve our author guidelines iteratively all the time. A new version will be coming out in November.
Okay, great. We're almost getting to the end. Well, there is the question of how do you finance Birds of the World? Came in late, even though I know, Brian, you did a good job of kind of covering that. Maybe just to wrap that up again, how do we finance it?
Well, we finance it through a variety of sources. And as I said, the revenue that we generate from individual and institutional subscriptions is a huge component of what covers our annual budget. We also have donors who are supporting Birds of the World at various levels. As I said, that's given us the flexibility to maneuver around our business model a little bit and be able to open up and be really I would say creative in the way we think about these partnerships and open access globally. So, you know, and one last thing on that, we are acutely aware that the global north/global south divide is imaginary. and that there are plenty of people in both of those places in variable economic situations. So if you live in a country that does not have open access and you need access to Birds of the World, we do have scholarships that Laura and Jess administer, and there's probably thousands of those out now. So there are ways to get access to Birds of the World for anybody who needs it, regardless of where you live.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think that's a really good place to end it. I really appreciate you sticking with us today. Still 200 people on, so woohoo. If again, if you're in a free access country, you'll know if you have access by going to birdsoftheworld.org, click sign in. And if you make an account or use your eBird account to sign in and you have access, that's how you know you're in a free country. Or you can rewind the tape and look at the map that we showed. If you are not in a free access country, you can purchase Birds of the World. Just click subscribe. And today we're offering a coupon code of webinar in all caps, webinar all caps. And if you cannot afford a subscription, we'd still like you to be able to use it. So please just click the scholarships somewhere in I think it's in the footer. So there's scholarships available too. So thank you so much for coming. And if you have any other questions or feedback, don't hesitate to reach out later. Love all of your ideas and really appreciate you reading Birds of the World. Any other final statements or anything from the team here?
Nothing specific other than thanks everybody for your hard work on this project and all of you for supporting us.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.